When I came back from the Christmas retreat, I still smelled of pine and candle wax. That quiet peace you only find when the world finally stops talking. I thought I would return to silence, to my books and the half-decorated tree waiting by the window. Instead, I found a stranger sitting by my fireplace, sipping my tea as if he belonged there. The sound of his spoon clinking against the cup was louder than any bell that night, and that was the moment I knew this Christmas wasn't mine anymore. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 71, and I live in Brattleboro, Vermont, in a house that smells like cedar floors and old piano strings. I've spent most of my life teaching children to find rhythm in a world that rarely listens. Since my husband passed, I've grown used to the soft clatter of my own solitude. Breakfast for one, the radio humming low, snow pressing its weight against the windows. Christmas has always been complicated. My family likes to plan things without me, as if I were another fragile ornament that might break the mood. This year, they insisted I go on a retreat for widows seeking serenity. I went, partly to please them, partly because silence felt safer than pretending to fit in at their crowded dinners. Serenity lasted exactly until I turned the key in my front door and saw him, an elderly man with silver hair and a plaid scarf, looking up from my armchair like a polite ghost. He introduced himself, Henry Dawson, my daughter-in-law's stepfather. Then he handed me a folded note written in my son's handwriting. "Mom, please don't be upset. Henry needed a place to stay while his retirement home gets fumigated. You two are both stubborn. Maybe this will help." My fingers shook reading that line. Help who? I wanted to slam the door and drive back into the night, but the snow had started again, thick and insistent, the kind that swallows every direction. Henry offered to make more tea. I almost told him to leave, yet something in his face, tired, kind, and slightly amused, made me stop. We stood in my kitchen like two mismatched bookends, surrounded by the awkwardness our children had built. He apologized for the intrusion, said he hadn't wanted to come either. "They told me you were reasonable," he added, as if testing the word. Reasonable. I could have laughed. The next morning I found my piano uncovered. He dusted it. "Didn't mean to pry," he said. "I just thought instruments shouldn't sleep through Christmas." His comment stung and warmed me at the same time. I hadn't touched those keys since my husband's funeral. For the first 2 days, we kept to opposite corners of the house. He read old play scripts by the window, and I baked cookies no one ate. Every sound, the turning of a page, the kettle whistling, felt like an intrusion. Yet the silence between us began to change, softening, as if curiosity were slipping in under the door. That's when the idea started forming, a flicker at first. If our families thought they could lock us away like misplaced gifts, maybe we could return the favor, in our own way, with a touch of Christmas mischief. I watched him glance toward the fireplace, the same half-smile forming again, and for the first time in years, I felt the faint hum of adventure under my skin. The next morning, the snow outside had thickened into silence. Every branch bowed under its weight. Every sound felt softened, as if the world had taken a deep breath and decided not to exhale. When I walked into the kitchen, Henry was already there, humming something cheerful and terribly out of tune while he fried eggs in my best pan. "Made breakfast?" he said proudly, sliding a plate toward me. "Eggs a la Dawson, a family recipe." I looked at the counter. Flour, nutmeg, orange peel, a battlefield of enthusiasm. "Looks like your family recipe involves chaos," I said. He smiled without shame. "That's the secret ingredient." I wanted to keep my guard up, to hold on to the anger that had protected me for so long. But there was something disarming about the way he moved, unhurried, almost boyish, as if he had decided that being old didn't mean being finished. Against my better judgment, I sat down and took a bite. It tasted like Christmas morning used to taste, before everything started to feel like duty. After breakfast, he found another note under the small artificial tree. It was from my family, written in cheerful handwriting with little snowflake stickers around the edges. "You two have so much in common. Stubbornness, pride, loneliness. Maybe you'll teach each other something before we're back from the Caribbean." I felt my chest tighten. Henry read it aloud and laughed softly. They think they're clever. They think they're God, I muttered, pouring myself more coffee. He tilted his head. So what would you do if you were God? The question hung in the air, ridiculous and tempting. Maybe it was the snow. Maybe it was humiliation turning into heat in my chest. Maybe it was the way his eyes gleamed, waiting for an answer. I'd make them think their little experiment failed, I said finally. Spectacularly. His grin spread like mischief in slow motion. Mrs. Brooks, I think we're going to get along just fine. By noon, we were already plotting. We drafted our first message to the family group chat. Simple, ominous, and absurdly satisfying. Small accident this morning. Nothing serious. Fire department was kind. Fireplace still smokes a little, but we're fine. I pressed send before I could change my mind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the phone buzzed. One message, then 5, then 12. Panic in every word. I turned off the screen, handed the phone to Henry, and said, "Merry Christmas." He raised his mug. "And to you, my partner in crime." It was ridiculous, really. 2 retirees playing pranks on their children, but laughter bubbled up from somewhere I thought had gone dry. The house didn't feel so heavy anymore. The walls seemed to breathe again. That evening I opened the piano. My hands hesitated over the keys, stiff from disuse, trembling with something that wasn't quite sadness. The first notes came out shaky and flat, but when Henry began to speak lines from A Midsummer Night's Dream as if they belonged to the melody, something inside me clicked. We were out of tune together, and it was perfect. Later, while washing dishes side by side, he said, "They think we're lonely, Eleanor. Maybe we were, but not in the way they imagine." I nodded. They think loneliness is silence, but sometimes it's being surrounded by voices that never listen. He looked at me then, really looked, and the air between us changed. There was a kind of recognition there, not romantic, not yet, but human. The kind that says, "I see your edges. They look like mine." Midnight came quietly. I poured us each a little brandy and raised my glass. "To bad ideas," I said. He laughed, the sound deep and alive. "To even worse children." We drank, and in the amber glow of the kitchen, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The next day began with the quiet rhythm of snow dripping from the eaves, the slow melting that always follows too much cold. I woke to the smell of coffee already brewing and the faint sound of Henry talking to himself. He was reading aloud from one of his old theater books, giving each line a different voice. It was impossible not to smile. He looked up as I entered the kitchen. "You know, Mrs. Brooks," he said, "I think I've discovered that silence isn't my natural talent." "I'd already guessed," I replied, taking a cup from the shelf. He grinned, undeterred. "Then you'll be pleased to know I've decided to direct a new kind of performance, a play for 2 actors, title still in progress." I sat down, pretending to read the newspaper. "And what would it be about?" "About 2 people abandoned by their families at Christmas," he said. "They start as strangers, then discover they're not quite as helpless as everyone assumes." I tried to hide my amusement. "Sounds unrealistic." "Most good plays are," he said, pouring coffee into my cup. The phone buzzed on the table again. Another message from my daughter-in-law. "Mom, what's going on? Please answer. Did something happen?" I stared at it for a long time. Henry leaned closer. "Round 2? We crafted our next reply carefully. Everything's fine. Insurance man came by. Said the damage looks manageable. Fireplace might need replacement, though." This time, we both laughed before hitting send. Henry paced the kitchen, gleeful as a boy. "We're terrible," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but at least we're interesting." It was strange how quickly routine found us. He cooked, I played piano, we talked about everything and nothing. The tension that had filled the air when he first arrived began to dissolve, replaced by something light, almost playful. In the afternoons, he sat by the window rehearsing lines, and I would listen without pretending not to. His voice had a warmth that made even Shakespeare sound like conversation. Sometimes he'd glance at me mid-sentence and wink, as if to say, "You're not invisible. Not here." One evening, as the light turned blue and the snow outside glowed like frozen sugar, he said, "Do you ever notice how they talk to us? The younger ones, I mean. Like we're furniture with feelings." I laughed softly. Furniture would get more respect. He nodded, then looked toward the piano. "Play something angry," he said, "something that bites." I did. My fingers struck the keys harder than they had in years, and for the first time, anger felt alive instead of lonely. When the last note faded, Henry clapped like an audience of one. "Bravo," he said. "Remind me never to underestimate you." That night, while we cleaned up dinner, I realized that my house no longer sounded empty. There were footsteps, voices, laughter that didn't echo. Even the walls seemed to listen. Before bed, Henry knocked gently on the doorframe. "Thank you for the music," he said. "Thank you for the noise," I replied. When I turned off the lamp, I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked different, not younger, but awake. I couldn't help smiling. For the first time in a long time, the world outside could keep its peace. Inside this small house, chaos was welcome. By the fourth day, we had settled into a rhythm that felt almost dangerous. Two people pretending not to care about each other while secretly enjoying every shared silence. I'd wake to the smell of coffee and the sound of his slippers brushing against the wooden floor, a domestic melody I hadn't realized I missed. He moved through the house like someone who'd been there forever, adjusting the radio, feeding the fire, humming off-key to Christmas songs from the 70s. That morning, I found him outside, trying to untangle the lights on the porch. Snow fell lightly over his coat, settling in his hair like frost. "You're doing that wrong," I said, wrapping my robe tighter. He looked down from the ladder. "There's a right way to hang disappointment?" I couldn't help laughing. He smiled, victorious. "See? Laughter. We're making progress." When I came back inside, the phone was buzzing again. Another series of panicked messages. "Mom, what happened with the insurance man? Did you call the fire department again? Why won't you pick up?" I turned the screen toward Henry, and he read it aloud in a deep Shakespearean voice. "Why won't you pick up? Act 3, Scene 2. Guilt in the Caribbean." We spent the next hour crafting our masterpiece, a perfectly balanced mix of absurdity and menace. All good now. Insurance man suggested replacing part of the wall. Fireplace looks better in white. Henry says smoke gives the room character. Then I added a photo of the living room, the one corner we'd redecorated, with a small tablecloth and 2 candles. To anyone else, it looked like evidence of chaos. To us, it was art. After pressing send, we collapsed on the couch, laughing until my ribs hurt. "Do you think they'll cut their trip short?" I asked. "I hope so," he said, eyes sparkling. "They need a good Christmas surprise." He started telling stories about his acting days, about touring tiny towns in New Hampshire and being snowed in with entire theater crews. The way he spoke made everything sound alive. The smell of sawdust from backstage, the warmth of cheap stage lights, the applause that echoed long after the curtain closed. "It's strange," he said quietly, "how easily you can disappear when people stop clapping." Something in his voice cracked, small but sharp. I felt it in my chest. "You haven't disappeared," I said. "You've just been misplaced." He looked at me then. Really looked. And for a second the air between us felt like a held breath. Then, softly, he said, "Same goes for you." That night we cooked together. He burned the potatoes. I oversalted the stew. We didn't care. We ate by candlelight, listening to the faint whistle of wind through the chimney. He told me that when his wife died, he stopped opening his mail for months because every envelope felt like a reminder that the world kept moving without permission. I told him that after my husband's funeral, I started leaving the porch light on, pretending he might still come home. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. There was comfort in being seen by someone who carried the same kind of ache. When I went to bed, the tree lights blinked slowly in the corner, red and gold reflections flickering across the piano. I lay there, listening to the house breathe, to the faint sound of Henry's footsteps, to the hum of the heater, to the echo of laughter still floating in the air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Christmas had already arrived, not loud and shining, but quiet, unexpected, and alive. By the fifth morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds, thin and pale but real, stretching across the snow like light learning to breathe again. I opened the curtains and found Henry already outside, brushing the car with the careful precision of someone who enjoys pretending to be useful. He waved, his scarf trailing behind him like a flag of stubborn pride. When he came in, his cheeks were red from the cold. "I checked the weather," he said. "More snow coming tomorrow. We're trapped." I handed him a mug of coffee. "Trapped isn't the worst thing that can happen." He smiled, slow and knowing. "That depends on the company." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many awkward breakfasts had passed between us just days ago. Now the silence felt different, soft, companionable, full of unspoken jokes. He reached for the newspaper, pretending to read, but I caught him watching me instead. "What?" I asked. "You hum when you think," he said. "Did you know that?" I didn't. It embarrassed me and warmed me all at once. "Old habits," I muttered. "Good ones," he said. "Keep them." That afternoon we decided to clean the house, not because it needed it, but because movement felt easier than thinking. I vacuumed while he rearranged the shelves, stopping every few minutes to make dramatic speeches about dust being the enemy of artistry. When he tried to climb a chair to reach the top shelf, I nearly shouted at him, but he just laughed. "Don't ruin my death scene, Eleanor. I've been rehearsing for years." He was impossible and wonderful. Later, when the sun began to set, he suggested we send another update to the family. "We can't let the audience think the show is over," he said. Together we wrote, "Everything's under control now. Fireplace looks even better. Insurance man said it adds character. Merry Christmas from your favorite disaster duo." Then we attached a blurry photo of Henry holding a hammer next to the hearth, looking proud and slightly unhinged. We didn't even wait for the replies this time. We just laughed, the kind of laughter that shakes the walls and leaves your eyes wet. After dinner, I played the piano again. Not carols this time, but a piece I used to love when I was young, slow and sad and beautiful. Henry listened in silence, his hands folded, his head tilted like a man watching snowfall. When I finished, he whispered, "I wish I'd met you sooner." The words caught me off guard. I looked away, pretending to fix the sheet music, but my throat tightened. "We weren't ready sooner," I said quietly. "We were still learning how to be alone." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. Before bed, I found a small note on the piano. "Thank you for the music. It feels good to be real again." It wasn't signed, but I knew his handwriting now, wide and looping, like someone who never quite finished what he started. I went to sleep with the note on my nightstand and the faint smell of pine drifting from the living room. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and patient. Inside, everything felt suspended, not finished, not beginning, just beautifully, perfectly in between. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter echoing through the house. For a moment, I didn't recognize it as ours. It had been so long since I'd heard joy like that inside these walls, light, unguarded, alive. Henry was standing in the living room, trying to hang a wreath that clearly didn't want to cooperate. "It's crooked," I said. He stepped back, hands on his hips. "It's festive," he replied. "Festive doesn't mean sideways." He gave me a mock glare, then laughed again, and I found myself laughing with him. It felt like the kind of laughter you forget you know how to make. By now, our little pranks had turned into a full-blown production. We sent another message to the family that morning. The evaluator returned. Fire damage minimal. Smoke smell improving. Eleanor says the piano survived. A pause, then another line. Barely. We waited for their response, sipping coffee like two villains in an old movie. It came within minutes, a flood of panic, confusion, and unsolicited advice. Henry chuckled and shook his head. "They still don't get it. They think we're falling apart." I smiled. "Good. Let them worry a little. Maybe they'll realize we're not just waiting to be taken care of. It wasn't vengeance anymore, not really. It was something quieter, a protest in the form of laughter, a way of reclaiming dignity through mischief. Every text, every inside joke, every shared glance across the kitchen felt like a declaration. We're still here, and we're still us. That afternoon, the sky darkened, the kind of deep gray that means snow is coming again. Henry found an old record from my shelf. Bing Crosby, White Christmas. He dropped the needle and started dancing in the middle of the living room, terribly, like a man who'd never met rhythm in his life. "Come on," he said, extending a hand. "One dance won't kill you." I hesitated, then let him pull me close. His hand was warm, his steps clumsy, his grin wide enough to melt whatever was left of my resistance. We swayed in slow, uneven circles, and I thought about how long it had been since someone held me without agenda or pity. The record crackled softly, and for a fleeting second, time stopped. Two souls suspended in the glow of Christmas lights that blinked in red and gold. When the song ended, neither of us moved. His voice came out low, a little unsteady. "You know, Eleanor, maybe our kids weren't completely wrong." I looked up at him. "About what?" He smiled. "That we needed each other." I wanted to argue, to remind him this had all started as a joke, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was there, quiet and undeniable, sitting between us like another presence in the room. That evening we cooked together again. He made pancakes for dinner, badly, and I pretended not to notice the mess. When we finally sat down to eat, the phone buzzed again, one message after another. We ignored it. The world outside could wait. Later, while washing dishes, I caught our reflection in the dark window, two old people laughing like children. For once, the sight didn't make me sad. Before bed, I found him asleep in the armchair, a book open on his chest, glasses sliding down his nose. The fire was dying out, painting him in gold and shadow. I covered him with a blanket and stood there for a moment, just watching. There was something in that stillness, not romance, not yet, but something tender and brave, something that whispered, maybe it's not too late to begin again. The storm hit that night, hard and wild, the kind that silences everything but the wind. The house trembled softly, the windows rattled, and I woke to the sound of the power clicking off. Darkness swallowed the room, but I could still hear the faint crackle of the fire downstairs. I wrapped myself in a blanket and followed the glow. Henry was already there, crouched near the fireplace, feeding it small pieces of wood like it was a fragile animal he needed to keep alive. "Power's out," he said without looking up, "but I've got this part handled." I sat on the couch, watching the light flicker across his face. "You like fixing things, don't you?" He smiled faintly. "Only the broken ones worth fixing." We sat there for a long while, listening to the storm. The air smelled of smoke and snow. Every gust of wind sounded like a sigh that had traveled 1,000 miles just to reach our roof. I don't know what made me speak, but the words came quietly, without asking permission. After my husband died, I stopped listening to the piano. I used to think the silence was peaceful, but lately, I think it was just empty. He looked at me, the fire reflecting in his glasses. "Then you should fill it again," he said simply. I reached for the old piano bench, the one still covered in dust at the edge of the room. I opened the lid, touched the keys, cold, unresponsive at first. Then I played. Slowly, uncertainly. The notes wavered, trembling like old hands learning to hold again. Henry leaned back, closing his eyes. "That's better," he murmured. The house was getting too quiet. Outside, the storm kept raging, but inside it was calm. The light from the fire turned everything golden, the curtains, the walls, even the lines on his face. I hadn't realized until then how gentle his expression could be when he wasn't trying to make me laugh. After a while, he spoke again, softer this time. "When my wife passed, I kept pretending I was fine. I went to plays, dinners, even dated once or twice, but I stopped feeling real, like I was watching someone else's life from the audience." I nodded. "That's exactly it. You keep performing because you don't know how to stop." He smiled. Maybe we could stop together. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then he reached out, barely touching my hand where it rested on the piano. The contact was small, almost accidental, but it sent a shiver through me. Not fear, not romance, just recognition. Two people no longer pretending. The storm began to ease. The fire burned low. He stood, stretching, then turned toward me with that mischievous smile again. "You realize," he said, "that tomorrow we'll have to escalate." "Escalate what?" "Our little act," he said. "They're probably half out of their minds by now. We should give them something to remember." I laughed softly. "You're terrible." "And you love it," he said, not as a question, but a truth. When he finally went upstairs, I stayed by the fire, letting the last notes of the piano echo in the air. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the whole world seemed washed clean. I thought about what he'd said, about stopping together, and for the first time since I could remember, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world covered in untouched snow. Smooth, perfect, cruelly temporary. The power was still out, but the light through the windows was bright enough to make everything glow. I woke to the smell of something sweet, and the sound of Henry singing off-key again. He was in the kitchen, wearing my old Christmas apron, flipping pancakes that were clearly more enthusiasm than skill. "You're early," he said when he saw me. "You're loud," I replied. He shrugged, smiling. "Breakfast deserves a soundtrack." I sat down, wrapped my hands around a mug of lukewarm coffee, and watched him move. It was funny how natural it felt now, having him there. The strangeness had evaporated like morning frost. In its place, there was something warm, steady, and quietly alive. We ate in silence, the kind that feels full instead of empty. Halfway through his second pancake, he said, "You ever notice how the world keeps going, even when you're not ready for it?" I looked at him. "I used to hate that. Now I think it's what saves us." He nodded, thoughtful. "When my daughter told me to stay at that retirement home, I pretended I didn't mind, told her it was convenient, but I hated every minute. The sameness, the noise of the television, the way people stopped calling me by my name. They called me Sir. I wanted to scream. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his for a moment. He looked down, surprised, then smiled, a small, grateful curve that said more than words could. After breakfast, we bundled up and went outside to shovel the path. The snow was heavy, but he refused to let me help much. "You supervise," he said. "I perform." "You're going to fall," I warned. "Then I'll make it dramatic," he replied. "I've got range." We laughed until our breath turned to mist in the cold air. When we finally went back inside, I noticed the phone blinking on the counter. More messages, longer now, frantic. "Mom, we're coming home early. What's going on? Please answer." Henry picked it up, read the screen, then looked at me with mock seriousness. "It's time for Act 3. He dictated while I typed. "We're fine." Had a small visit from a very kind fire inspector. He complimented our teamwork. "No need to worry." I added a little heart emoji at the end. It was the first one I'd sent in years. We both laughed until tears came. "You're wicked," he said between chuckles. I learned from the best. When the laughter finally faded, something else filled the space. A quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be named. He leaned back in his chair, eyes soft, voice almost a whisper. "You know, this isn't the worst Christmas I've ever had." "Me neither," I said. For a while, neither of us moved. The fire crackled, the snow outside shimmered, and I could hear my own heartbeat matching his slow rhythm. Later that evening, I played the piano again. He sat nearby, reading by candlelight, occasionally looking up just to smile. There was no need for words. The house had its own language now. Laughter, music, the soft rustle of shared air. When I finished, he said quietly, "If this is what being left behind feels like, maybe it's not such a tragedy after all." I didn't answer, but the thought stayed with me long after I went to bed. The world outside was frozen still, but inside, something was thawing. Something I didn't dare name yet, because naming it might make it real. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains like an apology. The power had come back sometime during the night, but neither of us had noticed. The house hummed softly again, the refrigerator, the heater, the small invisible heartbeat of normal life. It felt strange, almost too loud after so much quiet. Henry was at the window, watching the snow sparkle. "It's funny," he said. "When the world goes silent, you start hearing yourself again." I smiled, setting 2 mugs of coffee on the table. Dangerous habit. He turned to me, that playful light in his eyes. "Maybe it's time we get into some trouble." We both laughed, but there was something beneath it, a pulse of mischief mixed with affection. After days of turning our frustration into games, our laughter had started to sound like hope. Around noon, we decided to go for a walk. The roads were still buried under snow, but the air was bright and sharp. I hadn't stepped outside in days, and the cold stung my lungs like a reminder that I was still alive. Henry insisted on leading the way, claiming he had a sense of direction unmatched in the Western Hemisphere. He got us lost within 15 minutes. We found ourselves by the frozen pond at the edge of town, the same place my husband and I used to visit when our children were small. I stopped walking, suddenly flooded by memory. Small hands, laughter, hot chocolate in paper cups. Henry must have seen something change in my face because his tone softened. "You okay?" "I was just remembering," I said quietly, "how full life used to feel." He looked out across the ice. "Maybe it still can." We stood there a long time, our breath forming clouds that drifted upward and disappeared. I hadn't realized how close we were until I felt his arm brush against mine. It wasn't intentional, but I didn't move away. When we got back, we made soup. Simple, too salty, perfect. He turned on the radio, and we danced again, slower this time. Not the kind of dancing that fills space, but the kind that creates it, one quiet step at a time. Later, as we sat by the fire, he said, "You know what I think, Eleanor? I think we should stop pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this is an accident." The words hung between us, warm and frightening. I looked at him, unsure how to answer, unsure if I even wanted to. He smiled gently. "Maybe we don't need to wait for permission to live the way we want. Maybe we can just decide." I stared into the fire, feeling its heat bloom across my skin. "Decide what, exactly?" He leaned back, thoughtful. "That we're done being the problem everyone's trying to solve." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "That's a big decision." He raised his cup in a mock toast. "Then it suits us." The clock ticked, steady and calm. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Not a storm this time, just a slow, steady drift, like the world was exhaling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt present. When I went to bed that night, the silence of the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned, the kind that comes after laughter, after truth, after something begins to grow where you thought nothing could. The next day began with a stillness so deep it almost felt sacred. The snow had stopped, the air was clear, and the light coming through the windows was soft and golden, touching every corner of the living room like forgiveness. I found Henry at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper as if it were a map to somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to go. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, pouring coffee. He smiled faintly. "About what happens when they come back." I froze for a moment. It hadn't occurred to me to think about that. The family, the end of the game, the inevitable return of noise, explanations, guilt. "I suppose we'll have to face it," I said. He nodded. "Maybe, but on our terms." That sentence lingered in the air like a promise. On our terms. I sat down across from him, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. How different the house looked now. The walls were brighter, the air lighter, the silence alive instead of suffocating. Without meaning to, we'd built something together. Not romance, not yet, but a kind of peace that only comes when two people stop apologizing for being who they are. He slid the paper toward me. It was a list, small, handwritten, messy. At the top he'd written, "Things to keep doing even when the world remembers us." I read the first few items aloud. Laugh before breakfast. Ignore phone calls. Play piano after dinner. Don't explain. I looked up at him. "This is ridiculous." He grinned. "Yes, isn't it wonderful?" I laughed, shaking my head, but I didn't cross anything out. That afternoon, we redecorated the living room again, this time just for ourselves. We moved the couch closer to the fire, replaced the stiff holiday garlands with candles and old books. He found an old photo of me and my husband tucked behind the piano and handed it over carefully. "You look happy there," he said. "I was," I answered. "But I'm not sad now." He nodded, and I could tell he understood what I meant. Happiness and sadness were no longer opposites. They were just two shades of remembering. As the day faded, we decided to take another picture for the family. This time, we staged it deliberately, the two of us sitting side by side on the couch, smiling like accomplices. In the background, the fire burned low and warm. The caption we sent read, "All quiet on the home front. Fireplace fixed, spirits high. Insurance man says hello." We turned off our phones afterward. Let them stew. Later that night, we shared a simple dinner. Soup, bread, a little wine left from the retreat I'd almost forgotten in the pantry. The lights flickered gently, and outside, snowflakes drifted in the glow of the porch light. Henry leaned back, watching me over the rim of his glass. "You know," he said, "I think this might be the best Christmas I've ever had." I smiled. It's the first one I felt awake for. He reached out, brushed a crumb from the table, and said softly, "Then let's make it last." I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The room said it for me, the warmth, the quiet, the shared breath between us. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of laughter from faraway houses. But in ours, time stood still. When I finally went to bed, I paused at the doorway and looked back at him, still sitting by the fire, half asleep, his face peaceful in the glow. I realized then that we weren't pretending anymore. The game was over. What remained was real, and whatever came next, we would face it on our terms. The call came the next morning. I was in the middle of folding laundry when the phone began to buzz relentlessly across the table. The screen lit up with my son's name, followed by the familiar text tone from my daughter-in-law. Henry looked up from his crossword puzzle and grinned. "Ah," he said, "the audience demands an encore." I picked up the phone, hesitated, then answered. "Mom, are you okay?" My son's voice came out sharp, panicked, the sound of someone who suddenly realizes the world may not revolve around them. "We've been calling for days. What's happening over there?" I smiled, calm, almost amused. "Oh, nothing much. We've just been busy." "Busy? With what?" Henry whispered from across the room. "Say something ominous." I turned my back so he wouldn't see me smile. "We've had visitors," I said softly. "Insurance, firemen, all sorts of people. Everyone's been very understanding." There was silence on the line. Then my son groaned. "Mom, please, what does that even mean?" "It means," I said, "that you shouldn't worry so much." Henry was trying not to laugh. I finally hung up before I could break character, and we both burst out laughing. "You're cruel," he said. "Only to those who deserve it." A few minutes later, another message came through. "We're cutting the trip short. We're flying back tomorrow morning." Henry's laughter faded, replaced by a thoughtful silence. "So, curtains coming down, huh?" I nodded. "Seems so." He looked around the house. The rearranged furniture, the candles, the piano that had been silent for years, but now felt alive. "You know," he said, "we've made something beautiful here, even if they don't understand it." "They won't," I said quietly. "But that's all right." The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of peace. We didn't bother pretending to plot anymore. There was no need. The house had already told our story. He cooked soup, I played music, and the hours drifted by like snow outside the window. That evening, I found him sitting on the porch, wrapped in his coat, staring at the darkening sky. I joined him, tucking my hands into my sleeves. "Nervous?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not really. Maybe just reluctant. You ever wish a story could pause, right at the good part?" "All the time," I said. The street was quiet, except for the faint sound of wind chimes from the neighbor's porch. The air smelled like frost and wood smoke. He turned toward me then, his expression soft and serious. "Whatever happens when they get here," he said, "promise me we don't go back to who we were before." "I promise." He smiled, a little relieved, a little sad. "Good, because I like who we are now." We stayed out there for a while, watching the snowflakes spin through the air like drifting sparks. Inside, the house glowed warm and steady, the only light for miles. Later, after he'd gone to bed, I stood alone in the living room, looking at the photo we'd taken together, the two of us side by side on the couch, smiling like conspirators. For a moment, I considered deleting the messages, erasing the joke before it went too far. But then I didn't. Some stories are meant to be told to the end. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the fire. Tomorrow would come soon enough. But for one more night, the house was ours, full of laughter, full of life, full of the beautiful, reckless quiet we had created together. They arrived earlier than I expected, still in their travel clothes, sunburned, exhausted, and dragging the weight of worry behind them. I saw the car pull into the driveway just as I was lighting the fireplace. Henry glanced out the window, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Looks like the cavalry's here." My son was the first through the door. "Mom!" he shouted, scanning the room as if expecting smoke, sirens, disaster. Instead, he found the two of us sitting calmly by the fire, mugs of cocoa in our hands, music playing softly from the record player. His mouth opened, then closed again. What happened here?" I smiled. "We redecorated." Bethany, my daughter-in-law, stepped forward, her expression somewhere between confusion and relief. "You're both all right?" "Perfectly," Henry said, though the insurance man was quite charming. She blinked. "What?" He grinned, clearly enjoying himself. Inside joke. The room filled with silence, the kind that doesn't know what to do with itself. My son finally spoke, his voice softer now. "Mom, we thought—" "I know what you thought," I said gently, setting down my cup. "You thought two old people left alone for Christmas would fall apart, that we'd need rescuing." He looked at the floor. "We just wanted you to have company." "And you gave us that," Henry said, "more than you realized." They exchanged glances, confused. My son frowned. "So all those messages, the fire department, the insurance?" I shrugged. "Creative writing project." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Bethany exhaled, half laughing, half relieved. "Oh my God, you two are unbelievable." Henry smiled. "You're welcome." I couldn't help laughing then, the kind that comes from deep inside, from the absurd joy of being misunderstood and entirely at peace with it. My son finally sat down, shaking his head. "You scared us half to death." I touched his arm, softer now. "Maybe next time you'll trust that I can take care of myself." Bethany knelt beside the coffee table, her eyes landing on the photo of Henry and me that we'd left there on purpose. "You look happy," she said. I met her gaze. "We are." The room went still again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was new, the kind of quiet that happens when truth settles gently between people. Henry leaned back in his chair, clearly proud of the performance. "Well," he said finally, "now that everyone's alive and accounted for, how about dinner?" My son blinked. "You cooked?" Henry winked. "I've been trained by the best." The tension broke like thin ice. Bethany laughed, my son sighed, and just like that, the storm inside the house melted. We spent the evening together, awkward at first, then easier as the hours passed. There was soup and bread and more laughter than I expected. Every now and then, my son would shake his head, still trying to make sense of it all. When it grew late, Henry stood and stretched. "I think that's my cue to retreat," he said. It's been quite the act. Before heading upstairs, he paused by the door and looked at me with that quiet, knowing smile. "See? Curtains down, but the story isn't over." After they'd gone, I sat alone by the fire for a moment, listening to the faint sound of snow tapping the window. The house, once again, was mine. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a beginning, and for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the quiet. I was ready for it. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The chaos of the previous night had softened into something calm and almost tender. I stood by the window, watching my son and Bethany load their suitcases into the car. They were still embarrassed, still processing the truth of what they'd walked into. The quiet rebellion of two old people who had decided they didn't need saving. Henry joined me, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "They look guilty," he said. "They should," I answered, though my voice had no bite left in it. When my son came back inside to say goodbye, he hesitated by the doorway. "Mom," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm sorry. We shouldn't have arranged things without asking." I smiled softly. "You meant well. You always do. But it was wrong." "It was," I said. "And it was also the best mistake you've ever made." He looked confused. "How so?" I glanced at Henry, who raised his mug in a silent toast. "Because," I said, "you accidentally gave me back a part of myself." Bethany stepped forward then, her voice quiet. "So, you two aren't angry?" "Angry," Henry said. "We're grateful." The look on their faces was priceless, a mix of disbelief and reluctant amusement. My son sighed, defeated but smiling. "You're both impossible." "Absolutely," I said. We hugged before they left. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a fragile ornament being handled with care. I felt solid, grounded, whole. When the door closed behind them, Henry and I stood in the soft after silence that only follows forgiveness. "Well," he said, "that went better than expected." "Depends on what you expected," I replied. He grinned. Tears, shouting, a tragic fainting scene. "Sorry to disappoint." We spent the rest of the morning cleaning up, though neither of us wanted to. The house had been full, and now it was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one felt earned, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. At one point, Henry stopped by the piano and touched the keys lightly, not playing, just feeling them. "You know," he said, "I think we made a pretty good mess of this Christmas." I smiled, the best kind of mess. He sat beside me on the bench, and for a while, we said nothing. The air between us hummed with something unspoken but unmistakable. Finally, he turned to me and said, "So, what happens now?" I took a deep breath, looked around the house, the faint smell of pine, the soft glow of morning light, the echo of laughter still clinging to the air, and said, "Now? We keep living, on our own terms." He nodded slowly, then offered his hand, half serious, half playful. "Deal?" "Deal." The moment stretched, not romantic, not dramatic, just true. The kind of truth that arrives quietly, like snow falling after the storm has passed. Outside, the car pulled away, leaving fresh tracks on the clean white road. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and Henry began humming one of his ridiculous songs. I joined in, off-key and happy. For once, the house didn't feel too big. It felt exactly right. The day after they left, the world felt unusually quiet, as if even the snow were listening. I sat by the window, watching the frost creep along the glass, and realized I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. No calls, no apologies, no permission, just stillness. And it was beautiful. Henry came down the stairs humming, hair a mess, robe half-tied. He carried 2 cups of coffee like peace offerings. "Well," he said, setting one beside me, "I think we survived the family experiment." "Barely," I replied, smiling. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around his mug. "So, what now?" "Now," I said slowly, "we decide how the story ends." He raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like we have control." I met his gaze. "Maybe we do." We stayed like that for a moment, the two of us, surrounded by the aftermath of everything, the pranks, the laughter, the soft confessions that had built this strange and precious week. He looked at me, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We didn't want it to end. By noon, we were outside again, walking through the snow-covered yard. The air was bright and sharp, and the sky stretched clear and endless. Henry stopped by the old oak tree, leaned against it, and said, "You know, they'll never understand us. The kids, I mean. They think getting old means giving up the right to surprise people." I smiled. Let them think that. It makes it easier to prove them wrong. He laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty street. "You're dangerous, Eleanor Brooks." "I'm free," I said simply. We stood there for a while, watching the wind blow snow from the branches like glitter. Then he said quietly, "Would it be too much if I asked to stay a little longer?" I didn't answer right away. I could feel my heart beating, not with nervousness, but with recognition. "Stay as long as you want," I said finally, "but this time it's our decision." He grinned. Then it settled. Back inside, we built a small fire, the last of the wood stacked neatly by the hearth. The radio played faintly in the background, something old and warm. Henry poured 2 glasses of wine, and we toasted to what neither of us dared name. "To endings that turn into beginnings," he said. "To being the wrong kind of old," I replied. We laughed softly, clinking glasses. That night, he fell asleep in the armchair again, the fire painting gold across his face. I covered him with a blanket, then sat at the piano one more time. My fingers found a melody I didn't recognize. Simple, slow, full of space. It sounded like us. When the last note faded, I whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for everything. The mess, the mischief, the unexpected warmth." I turned off the lights, leaving the glow of the embers behind me, and went upstairs. The house no longer felt borrowed. It felt alive. And somewhere between the creak of the stairs and the soft hum of the night, I realized something. This wasn't the story of 2 people left behind. It was the story of 2 people who decided not to be. Christmas morning arrived quietly, without fanfare. No alarm clocks, no hurried schedules, no noise of wrapping paper or phones buzzing with family messages. Just sunlight filtering through the curtains and the slow realization that this peace was ours. Henry was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. The smell of cinnamon and butter drifted through the air. "You're up late," he said. "It's Christmas," I replied. "I decided to give myself the morning off." He grinned. "In that case, I made breakfast." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be afraid?" "Absolutely," he said, laughing. The table was a disaster. Flour everywhere, jam dripping from spoons, a tower of pancakes leaning like a collapsing monument. But it was the most beautiful sight I'd seen in years. We sat down, clinking our glasses of orange juice like champagne. "To survival," he said. "To unexpected company," I added. We ate in companionable silence, the kind that carries its own language. Outside, the snow glittered in the sunlight, soft and endless. The world felt both new and familiar, the way it sometimes does when you finally stop trying to control it. After breakfast, I sat at the piano, and Henry joined me with his old theatrical flair, reading lines from a worn book of poetry. "Read this one," he said, handing it over. The poem was simple, about winter and love and time, about how everything that ends only does so to begin again. When I finished, I looked up and found him watching me. That same half-smile I'd come to know. "You're thinking something," I said. He nodded. "That I was wrong about something." "Only one thing?" He chuckled. "About what comes after losing everything. I thought it was nothing. Turns out it's possibility." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that holds more than words ever could. He stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the snow. "You know, I never believed in miracles," he said softly, "but maybe they don't have to be loud. Maybe sometimes they just look like this, 2 people still standing after everything." I joined him, our reflections side by side in the glass. The years between us, all the losses, all the noise, seemed to fade until there was only this, a strange, luminous peace. He turned to me and smiled. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor." "Merry Christmas, Henry." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells from town. Inside, the fire hummed low, steady, alive. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like I was waiting for life to happen. I was living it. In the days that followed, the world returned to its usual rhythm. Neighbors shoveling driveways, mail piling up, snow melting into quiet puddles along the road. But inside my house, something had shifted. It wasn't louder, just warmer. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the heater, the faint clink of Henry's mug in the kitchen, carried a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. He didn't move out right away. Neither of us said he should. Days turned into weeks, and the idea of him leaving began to sound as absurd as the thought of us never having met at all. We were two people who had spent a lifetime doing what was expected, raising families, being polite, staying quiet when it hurt. Now, somehow, we had stumbled into something unexpected, the right kind of freedom. Sometimes we talked about what had happened, how the family's little experiment had backfired so beautifully. Henry would shake his head and say, "They thought they were teaching us patience." And I'd reply, "They ended up teaching us courage." Then we'd laugh, because it was true. There's a strange bravery that comes with age, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that quietly refuses to disappear. I began to notice how much lighter everything felt. I no longer waited for the phone to ring. I no longer feared the silence between one holiday and the next. I learned that loneliness doesn't vanish when someone fills the room. It fades when you stop apologizing for taking up space. And that's what Henry gave me. Space. A reminder that I still existed in the present tense. We kept some of our little rituals. Coffee at sunrise, piano at dusk, walks to the edge of the frozen pond. He still made terrible pancakes, and I still pretended to hate them. We still laughed about the insurance man who never existed. And sometimes, when the night was quiet enough, I'd hear him whisper lines from one of his old plays. Something about love arriving late, but right on time. On New Year's Eve, we didn't make resolutions. We made promises to keep misbehaving, to keep laughing, to keep living as though we hadn't already used up all our miracles. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. The snow still fell, the house still creaked, and time still did what it always does, move forward. But now, it moved with us, not without us. And that was enough. If I've learned anything, it's that beginnings don't care about age, and peace doesn't come from stillness. It comes from connection, real, imperfect, human connection. And maybe that's what Christmas was always meant to be. Not noise or perfection or grand gestures, but quiet hearts daring to stay open. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, know that it's never too late to build something new from what's left. Never too late to fill your silence with laughter. Never too late to find someone who sees you exactly as you are and stays anyway. If this story touched you, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and give it a little like so it can reach someone who might need it tonight. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And now, stay with me and watch the video that's appearing on your screen. The Journey.